This case is wild, honestly.
Right.
Like, it's got everything you'd want in, like, a true crime documentary,
Mm.
family drama and people saying totally different things happened. And in the end, you're just left with more questions than answers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of those cases where you really struggle to separate, like, who's the victim, who's, manipulating the situation, what actually happened. And the source you gave me, it looks like a YouTube video going over everything. That just makes it even more, I don't know, interesting. Like, how does that even change how we understand this?
Totally, right? Like, you got to wonder how much of what we hear is already spun a certain way, even
Yeah.
before we hear it. But okay, let's back up for a second, yeah.
Okay.
So it's 2014, we're in Lima, Peru. We've got Vanessa Maza, she's 42, and she's found murdered in her home. And the main suspect, her own nephew, Andrew, this 19-year-old law student.
Hmm.
You'd think open and shut case, really.
Well, not quite. It's the fact that everyone's saying something different that makes this so interesting. We've got what Andrew says happened, then what the police thought at first, and then on top of that, what Vanessa's family's saying. Every single one just adds this whole other layer of like, whoa, what actually happened here?
Okay, so let's start with, like, Andrew's side of things.
Yeah.
He's saying Vanessa's death, it was an accident, that it happened while they were arguing. And get this, the argument. Supposedly because Vanessa was, like, pressuring him into a sexual relationship.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a bombshell, right? And the police, they weren't buying it, especially since they caught Andrew literally running away from the scene with Vanessa's jewelry. Kind of throws a wrench in that whole accident story.
It does make you wonder, right? What was the deal here? Was he robbing the place and it went wrong? Or was it, like, way more than that?
Yeah.
And how does what he's saying about Vanessa even fit into all this?
To really get that, we got to dig into their lives a bit. Like, what was their relationship really like? Anything in the past we need to know about. And honestly, their personalities, their mental states, that could be huge here.
See, this is where it gets good. This isn't just about who did it, but why.
Mm-hmm.
And to figure out that why, we got to get inside their heads a little, right?
Exactly. And Andrew's lawyers, they're definitely playing that angle up. They're painting this picture of him, this young guy who just lost his dad, struggling with anxiety, epilepsy, even saying he was using marijuana to self-medicate.
So they're trying to make him look sympathetic, like maybe he wasn't totally in control of what he was doing. I see what they're doing there.
It's a classic move in cases like this. Basically saying, look, he wasn't in the right state of mind, so he did something he never would have otherwise. But even if we see it that way, there's still the fact that the crime was incredibly violent.
Yeah, no kidding. 21 stab wounds. That's not exactly what you'd call an accident.
Exactly. The physical evidence totally contradicts that story. Then you add the jewelry, and it really feels premeditated, like he planned it, which just throws the whole thing into question even more.
It's like we're looking at two totally different versions of the same event. On the one hand, you have what Andrew's saying, this whole story about his past, and Vanessa pressuring him.
And then you've got, like, the reality of the crime scene, the stolen stuff, and the fact that he ran. It makes you wonder if anything he's saying is true.
Which I guess brings up a bigger point. How much can we even trust what people say, especially in situations like this where emotions are running high? Everyone's got their own biases, right?
Totally. And it shows how much we rely on what people say, but how unreliable it can be, especially when it's a family and everyone's got their own history.
Speaking of family, what about Vanessa's family? What was their deal with both of them, Vanessa and Andrew? How did that affect how everyone saw this whole thing?
Their testimonies probably had a huge impact on how the jury saw things, Family dynamics, especially in cases like this, can get really messy. There's so much going on behind the scenes.
It's like we're not just dealing with a crime here, but this whole family's secrets and baggage. And that's got to be important for understanding how this whole thing went down, don't you think? It's like trying to put a puzzle together, but like half the pieces are missing, and the ones you do have, they don't even fit right.
Totally. And that's what the court had to figure out back in 2016 when they finally reached a verdict. Andrea got sentenced to 20 years and 10 months.
Wow, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Seems kind of light, considering how violent it was. What do you think made them go with that?
Well, sentencing, it's not just about, like, punishing someone, They have to consider other things, too, like if there were any what they call mitigating factors, like in this case, the defense saying he wasn't mentally all there, his age, and all that family drama we talked about. Those probably played a role.
So it's not always black and white, huh? Especially when it's not even clear why someone would do something like this.
Right. The court documents are probably nuts, like reading some psychological thriller, all these experts saying different things, everyone disagreeing, and it all kind of adds up to a sentence that's all over the place, just like the crime.
But even with the verdict, there's still so many questions, Like, what was really going on between Andrew and Vanessa? Could we even trust anything he said, especially knowing his state of mind and that he might have been using drugs?
And then there's that psych profile they did, saying he might have antisocial tendencies. It all makes you wonder if we'll ever really know the truth with all this stuff about their pasts and their motivations all mixed up.
Which brings me to something I found really interesting and kind of weird. So after he got convicted, the other inmates, they gave him this nickname, Queena.
Oh, wow. That's something else. Quina Malpartida, right, the boxer. She was a huge deal in Peru, known for being tough as nails, never backing down. Makes you wonder, what does it mean for Andrew to be associated with her? Especially in prison, where it's all about, you know.
Yeah, it's a trip, right? On the one hand, it's like he's got this rep now, maybe people are scared of him or something. But on the other, Keena's this powerful woman, and he's, well,
Exactly. It says a lot about how power works in a place like that, how people see each other, how they build their identities in that environment. Really makes you think.
and then you've got his brother, Jean-Claude, who keeps saying Andrew would never hurt anyone, that he's a good guy.
It's a good reminder that this isn't just some news story, you know. These are real people, and their lives are changed forever because of what happened. Families torn apart, wondering who to trust, and trying to find some kind of peace, some answers. It can take a lifetime.
Totally. And it just makes everything more confusing, you know? How can this guy, the good guy, his brother's so sure of, how can he be the same one who did something so awful?
That's the thing about people, isn't it? Good and bad, love and violence, it can all exist in the same person. It's not always so easy to separate.
Makes you realize that sometimes there are no easy answers, you know? Just this whole mess of emotions and loose ends. You know, we've really been picking this case apart, haven't we? The evidence, what it says about them, all of it. But it's easy to forget that there are actual people at the center of this whole thing. There's this letter. Andrew wrote it to his mom from prison, and it really got to me.
Interesting. What was it about the letter that struck you?
He says he's sorry for what he did. And I don't mean just like, oops, my bad. It's like real remorse, you know? Like he understands how much pain he caused. It
Right.
makes what his brother said about him being a good guy, it makes that feel more real. You know what I mean?
It's so true, you know? It's like when someone's not trying to defend themselves in court or whatever, that's when you see who they really are. And this letter, it just adds this whole other layer of sadness to everything.
Exactly. It reminds you that even though there's a verdict, the story doesn't end there. He's got to deal with what he did, try to be better, and his family, everyone, they have to figure out how to move on, how to live with this.
That's the part we don't usually get to see, you know? The courts, they care about the crime, the punishment, but what happens to everyone after? That's the real story a lot of the time.
For sure. So what do you think? What do we learn from all of this? You've looked at so many cases like this. What have you learned?
It proves that the truth, it's never simple, you know? We'll probably never know for sure what happened between Andrew and Vanessa that day. But when we look at everything, the evidence, who they were as people, everything around them, it helps us understand people better, you know?
It reminds us that nothing's ever just good or bad, guilty or innocent. There's always more to it. Stuff that makes us question what we think we know about ourselves, about the world, everything.
Exactly. And honestly, that might be the biggest lesson here. We don't need all the answers, you know? Sometimes it's okay to just sit with the fact that we don't know, to be okay with the gray areas and know that the questions that really stick with us, those are the important ones, even if we never get a straight answer.
It's like you said at the beginning, sometimes the truth is like hiding from us.
Yeah.
But when we dig into it, when we try to see it from every angle, and when we never stop asking questions, that's when we start to get it, even if it's messy and complicated.
That's it. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we grow, you know? By trying to understand, by being okay with not knowing everything, that's how we learn to be more human, to have empathy, to be wiser.
This whole thing is really giving me a lot to think about, and hopefully you too listening. The Vanessa Maza case, it's like this powerful reminder that getting justice, it's not always easy. It's a journey, not just a finish line. It's about trying to understand why people do the things they do and accepting that sometimes there just aren't any simple answers.